Look for a godly person, not just a good-looking person.
Oh, say that again. Say that again. Say that again.
Look for a godly person, not just a good-looking person.
There are times in life when love shows up in ways that totally rewrites our expectations. We all grew up with ideas about who we would eventually marry, their looks, their height, and their background. But God has a funny way of surprising us. His divine plan doesn't always match our checklist, but it always fulfills something way deeper. Today's story is about a beautiful woman who fell in love with a man that the world would not have pictured her with, a man who happens to have dwarfism. Their love isn't just about opposites attracting, it is about God's divine intervention, rewriting human standards of beauty and revealing what it looks like when we surrender to His wisdom over our own. Hi, Anita. How are you?
I'm so good, Breeny. How are you? Thanks for
I'm
having me.
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me. So you are the first guest in my season of Engaged. I said in my last video that I'm going to be making videos with wives. You are newlywed, so congratulations to you.
Thank you. Really newlywed, only 2 months, so the word wife still feels new to me.
That is so amazing. And your story is extremely unique. So I want you to take us through your love story. I did, as soon as you posted it, I read your story, 3 pages, and it was so beautiful. But I want you to tell the audience in your own words, what's your love story? Like what from the time you were single to the time you were married? Take us through a journey in a little bit of a summary.
Yeah, so I am somebody who found someone you could say older in life. So I'm 34 now, but I actually, all through my 20s, I always had the sense that I would meet this person I didn't want to meet them until my early 30s, actually. And I used to pray to God to not bring them to me yet. And so did a lot of traveling in my 20s, and I always knew I wanted somebody who was kind of humble and free-spirited enough to be also a world traveler, but still visionary and bold enough that they wanted to build things in life. Because as somebody with an entrepreneurial spirit, I love, and a creative spirit, I love making things. So the way I met Tim was actually the simple story, is just through mutual friends. But the long winding journey is that we got to work together. So Tim runs a water charity, and his longtime best friends were my neighbors in a neighborhood called Georgetown, which is about an hour outside of Toronto. And so I became good friends with these neighbors during the pandemic. We'd go for walks. And then at one of their birthday parties, I met Tim. And he was just one of many people. So these neighbors of mine actually graduated from the church that I used to work at, ran a Bible college. So when we first connected, we had like this instant connection. And so I just knew that Tim must be a good person for him to even be friends with this couple. They were like former missionaries and then now pastors. So that was how I first met Tim, but we didn't talk at all. And I noticed that his feet dangled off the chair. So Tim is 4 feet tall, and he was born with dwarfism. But when you meet him, it's visually, it's the first thing you'll notice. But like within 3 seconds of talking to him, you'll totally forget it because he's very friendly and very warm and like a gentle spirit. And that's usually the first thing people notice about him. And so that's what I noticed too. And we didn't really talk much. But then I ended up moving to Niagara, which is 45 minutes further away. And it was during this time that our friendship grew. He used to go to Niagara to visit. And
Niagara Falls.
yes, Niagara Falls, like Niagara Falls area.
Right.
And to use up his travel points, he would just stay at like because there's lots of hotels in the Niagara Falls. He would just use up his points to go and visit. And so when he would come by, then he would send me a text. And at the time, I lived in this gorgeous country home that just came as a part of my work. And it was so hard to get friends to come and visit me. You know what it's like with adult friendships, right? It's like requires so much scheduling. So I was just happy to have like a friendly face come and visit me. And so he would come and we would just like, Friday afternoon, I'd be done work and we would just have these long chats. It was actually quite romantic without it being romantic. We would walk through the vineyards in my backyard. And we just got on really well as friends. We had an instant connection because we'd both spent time in Africa. And he had exactly what I just described in terms of he was such a generous soul and he knew what it meant to live a life with purpose. He had had a corporate career and had actually left that in order to start this water charity. And then for the last 15 years had traveled the world building clean water systems in developing countries. And so we just hit it off and really vibed as friends, but I never saw him as a possibility because he actually, part of that friendliness, he gave off what I would call that vibe that seemed like he was very happy to be friends and had potentially made peace with the fact that he might be single his whole life. Some people just are like they seem so content to be single. You just assume that maybe they're actually not interested. And so we were friends for a long time, for about a year and a half. And at some point he started getting feelings for me. And I was like, I think I got the friend zone vibe. Now we have a joke. We call it no moves Tim. Like he just had no moves. He had no pickup lines. He had no gestures except for one gesture, which was he gave me one particular gift that I was like, this is odd. And I just kind of ignored it. But it was, as friends, I ended up going with him on one of his work trips to California where he was holding meetings with his USA board. And I could work remotely. So I just figured I'd take advantage of that. And so I felt comfortable with it enough with him, even as friends, that I would actually go on a trip with him, knowing that like there would be no funny business. Because I wasn't interested in that. When we first met, I was still recovering, like a long recovery. And I knew I wanted to be single and to enjoy my life. So I didn't think of it. But it was on that trip to California that we played a very fateful Uno game. And where it really changed everything because I was about to spend a year on sabbatical. And this is February 2024 to February 2025. I was about to go on a year-long trip. And I was excited for that. I'd been waiting for this for years, saving for it. And my plan, was maybe never to come back to Canada. I always imagined living somewhere else. And so this is what I talked about to him as my friend. And then he blurted out, "What about me?" And I thought, and I instantly knew what he was actually saying, but I was like, "What about you?" And he said, "I don't understand how someone as kind as you would just leave your friends and family." And I was thinking, like, that's kind of rude. I'm not leaving them. I'll just see them once, twice, or 3 times a year, like I do all of my friends and family when I'm traveling. Like, you'll be in the bucket of everyone else. But I already knew what he was really saying, which was that he didn't want to be in that bucket who only saw me 1 to 3 times a year. But at the time, I wasn't interested in him at all. I hadn't thought of it that way. And I just had to, I cut the Uno game off and like went to bed. And the next day just acted normal. But that really planted a seed in me. And I began to wonder if I had feelings. And then I was really kind of wrestling with like, how does this work? He's 4 foot tall. He comes up to me, like the top of his head is about the middle of my chest. And it's not anything I had ever imagined. I always just kind of assumed the person I would be with would be a little bit taller than me because that's a nice thing, and there's lots of people who are also that height, and it's just what we saw, you see it on Instagram, you see it in the movies. It was almost more normal, to think of that. And so, but I started kind of wrestling and thinking and really praying about it. And one of the things that came to mind was Nick Vujicic. He's an American-Australian motivational speaker who was born without arms and legs. He kind of has little nubs, and he's Christian and very inspirational. Has written a number of books, and I recalled that he was married and had written a book with his wife. And she's Japanese, Mexican, gorgeous. And so I just was like, how does that work? How did she come to terms with that? So I went to go find that book, devoured it in 3 days. And in the process of reading it, I realized that I liked Tim. And I realized that I had feelings for him. I realized that he actually was such a man of God. And that these things of like, how long your limbs are were so peripheral to like the heart of a person. And so I started being nicer to him on text, which confused him for a bit because I had kind of turned him down. And then one day, we started texting more, and I eventually just had to like tell him outright because he wasn't really getting some cues. And, admittedly, I had probably sent him mixed signals. And then by the time I told him, I think we both already knew because Tim is also a bit older than me. And I had also been praying to God that whoever was next, they would be the person. I didn't have time or energy to like be brokenhearted again and feel and to go through that whole process. I'm like a high feeler. So I knew that, so anything that I feel is kind of all or nothing. And so we joke now that it's like we went on our first date after we were already dating, because up until then we had actually been friends and like done a number of things together, but it was never a date.
Right.
So when we started dating, I feel like we probably went on 4 dates and then got married, but it's because we actually already had done traveling and had done work together, and I had been volunteering with his charity for a little bit. And so we started dating in November and then got engaged the following September. And I also ended up reworking all of my sabbatical travel plans so that we did a number of travels together. And then we got married this past June, and then our Instagram post went viral. Yeah, which is
how I found you.
Yes.
Yes. Wow. That's an incredible story. And I read it, and you're a really great writer. So I felt like I was there with you in all the scenes, following your journey with you. So your post did go viral. I think on one of them, it's got 1 million likes, not views, likes. So that is actually viral. That's probably gone around the world like 5 times, like literally. How does that feel? Obviously, I'm an influencer. I signed up for that. I don't think you signed up to be an influencer. How have you found that level of attention?
So it's being an online creator is an interesting thing. You can probably relate to this. There's moments where like you want it to go and then things happen, and then there's other times where nothing happens.
Yeah.
Right? And you're putting all this energy out. And so I have actually been creating content for almost 15 years, and I never hit for a long time. Like I think my first blog was like when I was 21, but it never got enough traction for me to like pursue it as a full-time career. Right. I still actually work in digital content for different companies and brands and nonprofits.
Right.
But I used to always ask, like, you put all this energy in, and like, so for some people, something happens. And for me, it felt like nothing was happening. Yeah. And so to actually see it go viral, it felt like, finally. And I knew that God was in this because, and it actually, time will tell, but I'm pretty sure everything is, all things are still coming together. And I was probably not supposed to be internet famous when I was 25 because, that comes with its own baggage. And even now, I wouldn't say that we're particularly big, but obviously our love story has traveled the world.
Right.
So for the first month, now it's been a month and a bit, but for the first month, I just feel like I spent way more time on social media than I intended to. Like, a little too many evenings with the two of us reading comments. But it was also really inspiring and encouraging. So obviously we've got the full spectrum of comments. Like there's a lot of rude comments, and thank goodness Tim is calm and steady enough to go and hide and delete the worst. Because I don't even really want to see them. But we also have comments that you can tell people have gone and they've read our whole story, and then they're going back and they're seeing who Tim is and who I am. And then you can see that I've actually never posted about us. Tim used to love posting photos of us while we were dating, but I I was happy to keep it private. It just felt like it was for us.
Yeah.
And so it actually feels like the birthing of, part of our purpose from God.
So
now,
what changed your mind from you being like a private person with your relationship to you being a public person with your relationship? What changed for you then?
I think this first seed was planted when I read Nick Vujicic's book, and I saw how people listen and pay attention to him because he has this different body.
Yeah.
And I also had seen, I kind of drew the connection that Tim has actually been able to build this charity and do a lot of good work around the world because he looks different.
Right.
Now, it's not that donors give because he looks different, but it actually his personality, his warmth, his friendliness, his kindness, his heart for people comes from a place of compassion.
Yeah.
And it's part of how God built him, right? God makes us look a certain way, and it actually becomes part of his destiny for us.
Yeah, yeah.
So I kind of put the two and two together that, I've always been someone, I'm not afraid of being public. I used to make more videos and do, create lots of content of my life and story. And then the beautiful thing is Tim is also not afraid of that, right? So, you don't want somebody who's almost too internet happy and wants to put everything out. But for me, it was also one of the aspects of confirmation from God that this is somebody that I can make content with who actually sees our story as something that could inspire others. Right. So I saw that for us, and he saw that for us. And part of it was just from my own reconciling, because I had never seen a couple with a tiny. I say this, I can say this because that was it. A mini husband and a full-sized wife. And it actually took me a little bit to kind of come to terms with it, to be actually, I find it really cute. And I think when I see it that way, then the right people will get that message in the photos.
Right. So where do you see you taking your story? What do you see you creating content on? Is it going to be about your relationship? Is it going to be about charity work? What's the angle do you feel like you're going to take this? Because I'm hoping you're posting a lot of, couple photos and stuff like that. Where do you feel like your niche will be?
Yeah, we're hoping to do both of those things. So I think we'll continue to share about our love story over the months and years to come, because I think that's something that can always inspire people. But we won't always be we probably won't be we won't be a full relationship advice influencers.
Okay.
The charity work and the humanitarian work and generosity is something that we are very passionate about, and we want to use that to invite people to live more generous, open-hearted lives.
That's beautiful. I do want to take it back a little bit, because I feel like I want this interview to be based on people's, I don't want to say small-mindedness. I want to open people's mind up a little bit, because my last video I was speaking about preferences and how most women, we put our preferences above maybe our standards or our deal breakers. So we focus more on the superficial than the actual character, the inner qualities of a man. So I'm going to ask you a few questions around that topic, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers, your viewers, want to know a lot about how you handle the hate as mixed with the love. But I want to ask you, going back, your dating history. Where are you from, by the way? What country are you from?
So my husband and I are both born in Canada, but my parents are from Hong Kong, so I'm Chinese.
Okay.
And he is half Guyanese and half Trinidadian.
Trinidadian.
Yeah. I should consider how to say it.
It's a mouthful. My auntie and uncle are from Trinidad, and I was in Guyana 2 years ago on a mission trip, actually. So yeah, I'm quite
amazing.
Yeah, and you're from Hong Kong.
I'm born and raised in Canada, but my parents are from Hong Kong.
Okay. So what was your type growing up, would you say, of man?
I had a feeling that my person wasn't going to be an Asian person.
Okay.
I kind of assumed, I kind of hoped that he would be like a tall, strong Mediterranean guy.
Okay.
And partly because I hope to live there and
okay.
some of the photos. Um, yeah, like almost pretty stereotypical. I assumed that they would probably be white, and then it kind of just stopped there.
Right. And did you date those your type beforehand?
Um, yes, a little bit.
And what happened with those? Obviously, they weren't the one, but what were those relationships like?
Those relationships, so they were actually very kind people, and they were always the interesting thing is so there wasn't actually a Mediterranean, but there were some white guys who but they were never Canadian. This was one of my things. They
Okay.
were always someone from a different culture, and so that was another thing that another reason I never considered Tim, because I thought I don't want to date a Canadian because Canadians can be a little bit boring in my opinion. Like the average person kind of just like gets a job and raises kids and takes kids to soccer. Whereas I had lived a much more adventurous life up until then and wanted to continue that. And I didn't feel like I would find that person in the suburbs or in the city, maybe in Toronto, but I live in the suburbs of Toronto.
Right.
And so those people always had like an international bent. They were generally more soft-spoken people, but they always had like that quiet strength. Yeah.
So would you say that was your type, like the gentle, kind, like you always had, that was your type? Because I think when we talk about type, people automatically assume outside, right? Like the stats, tall, dark, and handsome, right? But
Yeah.
sometimes that type can also be a temperament. So would you say that you've always been attracted to a type of gentle, kind man?
Yes, I would say so. Because I think, um, yes, I'm naturally more of like an introvert and like um, uh, I'm trying to think because Tim is also the funny thing is we have similarities, but in other times of day and in other aspects, he's more extrovert. Sometimes, I'm more social and and more expressive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say like tall, dark, and handsome was like I was probably going for like tan, dark, tan, tall, and handsome,
Right,
something
right.
like that. Yeah.
Right. So, okay, so I want to get into your story a little bit, just from your blog. I'm just going to read some of the excerpts and I'm going to ask you a few follow-up questions, okay? So it says, I felt so at ease with Tim. It never crossed my mind that he might like me romantically, which was fine because I didn't see him that way either. In between Tim's visits to Niagara, I would occasionally get texts from Tim. To be honest, at first I found them a bit of a nuisance. I even asked my sister to help me craft polite responses that gently reiterated my boundaries. I just wanted to be friends. Looking back, maybe I was picking up on some more than friends vibes from him, and I didn't want to encourage anything beyond friendship. I appreciated Tim as a friend, and that was it. What do you think? So take me back to that time. Take me back to that thought process to where you had completely friend zoned your husband. What was going through your mind when you started to sense there was a kind of attraction coming from him towards you?
Yeah, it's funny because I never only after the my post has gone viral, people have started writing headlines that say she friend zoned the person, and the way it played out though was actually like we call it no moves Tim now because it felt to me like he was intentionally friend zoning himself, and this is actually something we talk about nowadays because he's gotten so many comments from people asking like, where's your book? Like, teach me your game, what am I doing wrong? And I tell him, I'm like, Tim, you need to save like a generation of lost guys who clearly, and so we were discussing what he would write about, and it was that he really wanted to be my friend. He actually intentionally, so this is where he was more intentional about it than I was, because I think early on he might have picked up more than I did that like the way he says it is like he wanted to get to know me. So we have this great mutual friend. And he says he noticed like I was like a bubbly person, and so he wanted to get to know me. And so he wanted to be my friend, which is something you don't hear guys talk about often. And so now looking back in hindsight, I feel like that's exactly what I picked up on. In person, it was like he wanted to be my friend. You know, when you have those conversations with people and you feel a little bit like, oh, should I ask that or not ask that? I felt like with him we could really talk about anything, because the vibe, the energy I got from him was just like we're great friends because we have similar passions and like similar interests. And so like that's what we would talk about, our interests and the things we were, you know, the things we liked, the things we had done. And I loved that he ran this water charity. So we'd talk about how he did that. He thought it was cool what I was doing, which was I was like doing content for a travel company in Niagara. And so when he started sending me these like out of the blue texts, so, you know, now we laugh about it, but I remember he sent me a text once about mint. Like he took a picture of mint in his garden, and it was just like, I was like, what is this? And then he would also, sometimes he does this thing where he'll text people and he'll just say, hi, like, hi, Anita. And he won't say what he's actually asking for. And so me being, and this is partly my personality, like I found it really annoying because he wouldn't ask me what he was wanting to ask me for. And even nowadays I tell him, I'm like, when you text someone, you should say like, you know, like, hey, whoever, are you free this weekend, or whatever you actually want to ask them. What he does or used to do is he would say, hey, so-and-so, and then he would wait for them to reply. And then he would ask them the thing. But to me, that's, you know, I was like, that's not how you use text. And
okay, so just a little bit more of the story. I'm just gonna read. You said I asked my sister to help me craft a long diplomatic message explaining that I wanted us to just remain friends. I thought it was the best way to maintain boundaries while keeping our friendship intact. But before I sent it, something unexpected happened. God interrupted me. As I held on to that message, rereading it over the next few days, but hesitating to press send, I felt a stirring in my heart, a gentle nudge from God. Why are you resisting Tim so much? After waiting a few more days, I sent the text to Tim, but almost immediately I regretted it. A part of me didn't want to send it at all. But how could I imagine myself with a 4-foot man? Tim's torso was normal size, but his arms and legs were shorter. While that could look cute in some ways, it wasn't what I had ever pictured in a partner. I had always envisioned myself looking up into my partner's eyes, but with Tim, that wasn't possible. What was I supposed to do? So for anybody that is in the similar position, they have met a man and for whatever reason, they're not sure because they are not their usual type, or they are worried about what other people would think. Talk me through your thought process at the time. What were some of your doubts? Let's start there. What were some of your doubts? And you can be honest, you can be real, obviously respect to your husband, but I want us to really iron out and wrestle with this conversation, because I think this is something a lot of women do go through when they meet someone amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was, you know, I saw a comment the other day and it was like, there's people that aren't even as short as Tim and they already feel like they're overlooked, you know, just because maybe they're 5 feet, which for a woman, it's perfectly fine to be 5 feet. So it really is something we almost, I want to be like, hopefully as a society, we can get over it more, but I totally understand because, you know, one of the most basic things when we actually did start dating was I was like, how do we snuggle? Like I had to tell him that I liked him, but I don't know how we will snuggle. And to this day, I feel like every couple of weeks we figure out a new like snuggle position.
What's the one that works now?
So like even these days, so in the mornings, I'm usually sitting on my floor doing devotions. Like I sit on the floor, lean on my bed. So he'll come and sit beside me and like his head is like right here. So he actually leans in and it's so cute. And I find it like he fits in this little nook. I always imagine that I would be in the nook of like a bigger guy, right? But actually he fits in and part of it has been from, being open to discovering it together. And that's actually, this is where Tim's demeanor really comes into play, because um, he was very like open to trying things. And, you know, he's not like ashamed of his body. He'll talk about how he's like been in it all his life. So like, this is, what does he say? He's like, it's what God gave me. Um, and, and so I've learned to find other parts of him that I find very endearing, but I'll get into the doubts first. So obviously it was less, so the whole idea of like, you know, what would kids look like? That actually wasn't a very big concern for me, because I'm still at a, like, I still feel like I would be fine if I did have kids or if I didn't.
Okay.
You know, that was how I felt when I was younger. I like didn't want kids at all. Now I'm at the point where like I could go either way. I can see life being meaningful either way. That's how I put it. But for my mom, it was actually like a huge thing, and she was freaking out for a bit. And I would imagine something like this can happen to a lot of people, especially if you choose to date someone with like much more like physical differences, not just a couple of inches. So that was something to just like talk through. So we had a couple of drives. I remember Tim and I actually talked about this. And I explicitly explained how I feel about kids, and he explicitly explained how he did. And then this is one of those things where, you know, the way God wires our heart, thankfully, just works. Because Tim's attitude is very much, you know, it should be largely the women's choice. Obviously, the guy can have a say, but it's the woman who bears a child, and it's the women who will often do much more of the manual part of raising children, like especially in the early years when you're breastfeeding.
So if you had children with Tim, would they be dwarfs by default?
Not guaranteed. So
What's
in his case, so my mom like insisted on trying to get a percentage, but the way I was trying to tell her, the thing is with God, it could be like 100% and then it'll happen, right?
Yeah.
Or, you know, like, does it really make a difference if you think it's 60-40 or 80-20, you know, like how much, where's the peace going to lie? Is it
Right.
in God provided for you, or is it this number? So in his case, actually everyone in his family is tall, and then he is the third child, is the only one like this. If he grew up in a family where he was the child of two people who had the condition, then, you know, there's a very strong likelihood they would. And one of the couples that kind of also paved the way for, at least in my mind, of like, okay, you can still have a functional, thriving life is Tori and Zach Roloff. They used to be on the reality TV show.
TLC? Was it TLC?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
So Zach is small, and then Tori is regular sized, and
Right.
they have 3 small children.
Because you're 5'4", you're 5'4", aren't you? So for all intents and purposes, you are actually meant to be the short one. You are short compared to everyone else, right? Yeah. Right.
You know, normally. Years. So that was a big one that for us kind of was pretty easy to sort out, because I was actually okay not having kids. And then when I also talked to them, I was like, well, what if we did want to? And then what if I went through this whole period of being a little bit like sad or scared. It's like, well, then I'm going to be stuck with all this work. Right. So, because even for him, as the child gets bigger, he can't carry it. Whereas I could keep carrying a child, like lifting a child, right?
Yeah.
And he said something that I knew he really meant from the heart. And he said, Anita, if I really want to help you, I will find a way to help you. Oh. It doesn't matter how tall I am. He's like, there are people who are 6 foot, who are 5'11", but if they do not want to help their wives, they will not.
It's true.
And I was like, oh, that's it.
Very true.
Right? It has nothing to, how much they care about you has nothing to do with their height. And I see that with Tim. You know, and there's fun, creative things that, like creative ways, like we have lots of stools in the house and for him to reach things. And I knew that if we decided to go down that path, we would figure it out together, because that's who he is.
Yeah.
And so that was an important conversation to have. Another thing from the age difference that, again, was less of a concern for me at first, but when I brought it up to my mom, it became like a massive deal, and I had to sort it out for a bit, was the age difference, because my parents were freaking out a bit of like, you're going to leave my daughter a widow. That was one of the things they were saying. And,
Right.
because my dad is a pastor of an older congregation, he sees lots of widows and, feels sad for them.
Yeah.
Um, and then, and then I would bring it to Tim and he would say, like, I'm not going to live my life in fear. And then he had a really good point, which is that no one really knows how much time we have.
It's
There's also lots of couples that get married young, that like 28, they think they're going to have the rest of their lives to live. And then at like 35, the husband heaven forbid, gets in an accident and they're gone. And there's a mom raising like 2 or 3 kids by herself now, right? And has to rebuild. Like, obviously we wouldn't wish that for that to happen to us. But the truth is that, the phrase like, I would rather have, 20, 30 amazing years with somebody who really makes, changes my whole life and I change their whole life, right? What we can build together is so incredible, and so filled with God that, like, why would I not do that just out of fear of what's going to happen to me when I'm 70?
right. What
So
about
that was the thing to
what
process.
what about the physical differences in between you and your husband? You obviously said that your type was white, tall, and Tim is clearly, let's be honest, the opposite of that. So how did you adjust? How did you adjust to that difference?
Yeah. So, part of it was because by the time that I realized I liked him, I already knew who he was as a person.
Okay.
And it's kind of like when you have a really good friend, right? When you've made a good friend, like they come to you in their pajamas with their hair all messy and like, their makeup all over, you still love them. If you met them like that, okay, maybe it would take a little longer to warm up. But if once you got to know them, they would still be your friend. And so with Tim, it had already gotten to the point. And this is like really the value of friendships, right? And getting to know people as friends. Because I already knew who he was as a person, that then I just had to process what it looked like for us as a couple. But I already loved him more as a person because I had already seen those parts of him and like spent hours and hours talking with him, traveling with him, seeing how he interacted with people. And another thing too is I actually saw like God's hand on his life. He has this incredible story of how he left corporate and then was able to start the charity, and like none of which actually existed. He just left corporate, and there was a 2-year process for that to happen. And I also saw the favor that he had with people. Here I can say that, right? Like God has gifted him with this way. Like that's how he's been able to raise money for the charity, and he has friends all over the world. He connects with people really easily. And so I knew that God's hand was on his life. And if anything, this is one of those, that's almost what all of us should put on our list. We should ask for someone from God that, his hand and his favor on their lives. Because if God's favor is on someone, then, you want to be wherever they are.
Right. That's powerful. That is very true. So tell us, because I actually watched a video of on YouTube of him talking about his charity. And I think on your social media, it would actually be really nice to hear Tim talk. But me watching the video, I was like, and I saw you posted in your story today that there's something about him that is very endearing. And as I was listening, I was just like, I see it and I feel it. This is when he speaks. And so for those people that don't know Tim, like you know him, like describe why you fell in love with him. Describe what it was about him that you fell in love with.
So I've already used words like kind and gentle, but I'll use one that I used when I told him, which is that he's tenderhearted. And it's very hard to find a guy who's tenderhearted. And I don't think it's because guys aren't, but I think they're trained by society to think that they should be tough and macho.
Yeah.
And I feel like because Tim was born small and he had lived his whole adult life that way, it was almost like he couldn't, psychologically, he couldn't use that tactic. It doesn't work. Otherwise, it comes across more like the Chihuahua strategy, right? Which we can all recognize that. But with him, it was like the way that he connected with people, or the way he describes it is like growing up, he would get some comments and things, but the way he kind of sidetracked that or diverted that was by being friendly. And as soon as you're friendly to people who are a little bit rude to you or a little bit off to you, you catch them off guard,
Yeah.
and they kind of like catch their own they catch their own behavior, and then they start treating him like a normal human instead of
Yeah.
just commenting on its appearance. And so that's an aspect of him. But the tenderhearted is, I've written some posts about his eyes, and you can really see it. And he really has a heart of compassion. And I think, some people, they see poverty and they just kind of look it over. But similar to my own travel experiences, when he saw it, he really let it touch his heart, and he really tried to figure out how he could like shape his life so he could make a difference in the way that he wanted. And so that spirit of like caring for people, living for purpose and intention, and this just having that a little bit of like a bubbly, lighthearted, genuine demeanor. All of that combined makes this beautiful little package that's Tim with a big heart. Small package, but a very big heart.
That's so lovely. I want to ask a personal question, but I'm sure that a lot of people would want to know. You don't have to answer, but when it comes to intimacy, how does that work?
Yeah. So obviously before we dated, I also wondered this. And then there's a little line in Nick's book, the book that it's called Love Without Limits. And he wrote it with his wife, Kene. And there's this little line where she is, the wife is asking that question to herself and is asking that question to other people. And is just talking about like, people are like, well, how does that work? And then, I'm trying to think of if it's either in the book or it's in some other articles, because I Googled them and read some stuff. They have 4 kids, and he doesn't even have arms and legs. And I think there's a comment in the book, and it says, where Nick makes that it says, you don't need arms and legs to make love, which is an interesting comment. Because as long as you have the more essential body parts,
Right,
you could make love. Which I thought, I was like, oh, well, that's a bold statement. Because Tim has arms and legs, and he has everything else is functional. So I guess that's not an issue then. And after reading it, because for them it's even more, right? Like Nick can't even, he can't even do his own buttons because he didn't have fingers. Do you know what I mean? Like the way that she must support him and love him, and the way that he must support her is a very deep love that you can, like, from the outside you just see that they're together, but from behind closed doors, obviously there's a very deep love for each other. So I felt like they kind of set the best possible example of like sacrificial servant, genuine love, that then the things that I would wonder about with Tim, I was like, oh, that's, it's like basketball players dating someone like my height. They would have the same issues. And there's a lot of basketball players with women who are not 6'3".
yes.
So it works for them. And then in that case for us,
It works.
We fit in the same range.
You're saying it works, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. So then you talked about Nick and his wife with her supporting him as sacrificially, and then him supporting her, I guess, more in an emotional level. How do you support him, and what are some of the things that you have to? I know he has a seat in the car where he's able to drive. There's like a lot of different things that you have to like overcome. So what are some of the things that you support him with? What are some of the things that he supports you with, and how does that work?
Yeah, he's so supportive, and this is one of the things I love most about him and why I knew I could be with him. Because even as friends, when a friend really supports you, that they'll say things, they'll do little extra things for you. And he would do this for me even before we dated. So I knew that he would continue, and he does. From like a housework standpoint, he does like the dishes like all the time, and he cooks for me and he cleans for me, which I love. And then pretty much anything that I ask him to do that he can help with, he will, and he does it quickly. If I'm like, oh, I need I think one of the first times was like I came over and I was looking for butter and I was like, "Oh, you don't have a tray for butter?" And then it like came in the mail the next day and I was like, "Oh, okay, I didn't mean you have to buy it right then."
Thanks,
And so
Amazon.
so he did things like that early on, but I knew that like he's not afraid, not that it's about spending, but he's not afraid to like use his money so that we can have like a full life.
Yeah.
And that I really appreciated. And then the ways I support him, I mean, he's I just do it naturally, but he's always telling me that I'm very vocal about my support, and I always like tell him how much I love him. And I'm probably the one that like reaches for him first in terms of physical touch. And we love spending time together. And I think because we're both more tenderhearted in like we're both pretty tenderhearted and like soft-hearted. And then we also are both great communicators, and just because we're tenderhearted, we get right to the chase, right? Like I've heard people talk about how like they have to catch their husband or at the right mood to talk about deep things. With Tim, we can just go there,
Right.
and that allows us, I feel like, to just like say what we need to say and resolve things very quickly. And so even with house things, which is the main thing that we're like perpetually chipping away at, he's always helping me to like slow down and be steadier and not be overwhelmed. And then I feel like I help him to like keep things moving along and not get stagnant.
That's beautiful. So I saw you also made a video defending yourself against using him for money. That was a comments. I'm not sure there was a comments that were made. But why did you feel the need to? And I actually loved how you responded. You could have easily clapped back, but you just chose to show compassion and actually come at it in a really positive way. Okay, first question. Okay, actually, let me ask that afterwards. Why did you feel the need to defend that comment out of all the comments that people had made?
Yeah, the biggest reason that we felt we needed to defend, or I felt like it was appropriate to speak up about, how rich Tim is or is not, is because we got so many of those comments. I actually think it was all those people that made our post go viral. If you like supported and you were curious, then like you might push it along. But it was like, it felt like a good 70-80% was just people being like stunned and then being like, oh, it's just because he's rich. And a lot of the comments are obviously written in a condescending tone. And, obviously, you're supposed to ignore the trolls, but there were just so many.
Yeah. You have
Like
a lot
thousands and thousands. And it was also fascinating because there was a range of people. There were people who were like, felt sorry for themselves, and then they said he's rich. And then there were people who were on the jealous anger side, obnoxious, narcissistic side, saying, also making that assumption. And so, and also because Tim and I, so the truth is that we are actually about at the same like income levels, you could say, and like education levels. Like we both have master's degrees. He's worked at a charity, and I actually, haven't said this publicly because it's too much to write, but there's the odd person who's actually gone and looked at how big the charity is. And it's actually a small charity.
Right.
Which will tell you that he's not making like $10 million a year running a charity with a budget much smaller than that. So those people who've actually like thought and looked will realize that actually I have an MBA that if I wanted to, I could probably be pursuing like a much more like lucrative corporate career, which for now I'm not. But so both of us could actually be much like in like more lucrative careers than we are if we wanted to. And we've actually consciously made that choice for now to do things that give us more purpose, trusting that God will provide along the way. And, money isn't just from working in a job that is like high stress and that whole world. And so another reason we also wanted to talk about is because it's actually part of our, like, I think our marriage mission, if you will. which I mentioned about generosity and humanitarian work and philanthropy and encouraging people to make use of what God has given you, whether it's your education, your ability to speak English or multiple languages, like use what you have to do something good in the world. Like that's what we've both just been trying to do. And so so it felt like it's a nice gateway for us to open the door, be like, hey, you want to talk about money? Actually, we're not afraid to talk about money.
Right.
Because we have actually something really intelligent to say about it.
Why do you think people make that assumption about you guys?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this at first because I knew from the moment I met Tim that he wasn't making a lot of money because of his charity. And he'll talk like it's a tiny charity, and he doesn't like flaunt how much he makes by any means because it's not that much to flaunt. And then I think for us though, it was really knowing that like this is that we can break barriers by having real conversations about this, because actually I think a lot of people just jump to that inclusion. So I think when I first responded, and I wrote this long article that then we put on our blog, it's kind of broken up into 3 parts. There's actually the first response that I wrote, which now is rewritten, which is a little bit of like an angry, intelligent.
Okay, it's still there.
Yeah, it's still there. It's a little bit. It's finessed, so it's softer though. So if you can't recognize that it's angry, then I've done my job. But I actually wrote that and sat on it, and Tim was like, "Don't post it." And I was like, "Okay, we'll give it more days for it to keep going viral." And then one morning during my devotions, it wasn't meant to be public, but I was like, "Okay, like clearly they don't really know what to say to these trolls, but there's so many. So God, what would you say to them?" And then, God said what he always says, which is basically like, I love them. Like I provide for them the same way that I provide for everyone. Like, they're obviously like hurt and confused and, like I'm here to guide them. I surround them with angels just like everyone else. I was like, oh yeah, right. So like maybe I shouldn't be talking down to them like in my original.
I love that.
And then I added a third part, which was basically I explained that process. And then, so I published it now. It's a big thing that just sits on our website if people want to check it out.
Wow.
And that really helped me process. That was kind of the first layer, but I'm kind of glad that it's still an ongoing debate of like, how rich is Tim? Because I actually think most couples where that happens, I feel like people don't comment on it. They're just, they're like, whatever, you can think whatever you want, but he's rich and she's happy.
Right.
That in our case, we're not afraid to talk about it because I actually think it's a really meaningful thing to talk about. And we hope to, we're like happy to spark that conversation. And just a couple of days ago, I saw a comment and it was phrased differently. And I felt like God used it to nudge me. And the guy wrote, is he rich? In a way that I felt like he was like, is he rich? Like most of them have just been assuming he must be rich.
Right.
But it was different. And I had this moment of like compassion for this guy because he was probably like, was caught in between asking like, do I have a chance? Or like, is this real love? Like, should I believe this? And obviously we want people to believe that God has someone amazing for them, that God will provide for them. We want people to have hope that God has a good future and a destiny for them. And if they dream of having an amazing spouse, that's in the plan. That's God's plans for them too. So,
and I think that's what it's really about. The hate comments is that behind the hate is people feeling, and I've seen a few of them. I feel like mainly it's men that are commenting on your post in a jealous, envious way that kind of feels like, well, what am I doing wrong? If he can get a woman, and I think it's a compliment to you as well, because they're obviously calling you, a beautiful woman and stuff like that. So I think it's a kind of, they say that it's a fine line between love and hate. There's some love behind there somewhere, but I think it's sad because we are living in a world where men are against women, women against men, and maybe men are feeling quite hopeless. And when they see a beautiful couple come together in an unconventional way, it kind of triggers their insufficiency or what am I doing wrong, you know? But as much as they're asking or they're making jokes, they're not actually sitting down to say, okay, maybe it's my personality that stinks. Maybe it's my personality that needs to change. It's not my looks or what I have. Because they could, if they assume that Tim has money, basically what that is saying is that, well, that's the only reason. They can kind of throw it away. Well, that's the reason why he's got someone. Because men truly believe that women are only with men that have money. I think that's the narrative in the world at the moment. So I think it kind of like throws them off. So when you say, actually, no, they're like, okay. Yeah, now I have to actually self-reflect and realize that actually maybe it's my attitude or my personality why I don't have what I desire. So I kind of see it in a complimentary way. But I want to ask offline, how do people respond to you? And you guys travel, obviously. Have you had what was the funniest comment that you've received from anyone as you travel together? I'm sure they asked, is that your brother or?
We actually haven't gone as many, but I have heard other people, like Zach and Tori Roloff. Tim says that they get comments like they assume that he's her son, that he's her husband.
Right.
We haven't had any like that yet. We have had people recognize us from our posts, and you know, those are just like fun short exchanges. And then so far, the thing is, and I think this is, you know, also when people are like doubting, like, oh, how will this look? The truth is that most people are generally polite, and it's rude to comment on somebody's like physical differences. So even my parents were afraid of this at first. They're like, oh, do people treat him differently? And I'm like, no, if you go out with him, it's actually rude to be commenting, right? It would be like if somebody went by in a wheelchair and you're like, you looked at them and stared at them.
Okay.
You can glance, but you shouldn't really stare at them.
Right.
Bad manners.
Right.
So in that respect, we haven't had as many weird things. I think the funniest cute thing is just that when we first started dating, like I'm usually, and even now, I'm usually the one that grabs Tim's hand. And it is kind of funny because the angle at which he grabs my hand is closer to if you were holding a child's hand, right, because it's from a low angle, not from a higher angle. But I've just come to love those things. And now my love for how adorable and endearing and like kind and gentle he is trumps whatever people think anyway. Like I feel so blessed that God has given me such a sweet, sweet soul. And I often joke to Tim, I'm like, you're going to start a whole generation of like, people are going to ask for where they can find more small people like you because they're going to hear about how much I love you. It hasn't gotten there yet. But I think the fact that we genuinely love each other, and also, and this is, you know, God's gift to us for the people, which is that like, we're not afraid to talk about it, right? We're not afraid to address issues head on. We've both done public speaking. Tim still does. And, you know, I create content for a living. So, you know, we're happy. And I think it's incredible that, you know, we didn't censor the God parts of our story in our love story. And it still spread around the world.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Like, that's a God thing.
That is a testament to the power of God and that you are actually giving glory to him in that. And I think it definitely touched people. Would you say that your attraction to him has grown?
Yes.
Because, you know, people have this thing that, well, I'm not attracted to them, but I've also heard other people say that, you know, attraction does grow. It's not static. And I think, what would you say has helped that attraction to grow? I think
somebody actually told me, my sister, when I was going through that phase wrestling and she was helping me write that text, you know, we're talking about like, oh, I don't really find him attractive. I might have even said that. And she said that to me, like, well, attraction can grow. Like when you love somebody, they look different to you. And I was like, you know, at the time I was like, I don't really want to hear that. But it has. Right. And they do look different to you. And in Tim's case, he actually has this like very special smile. And I think sometimes it's captured in some of the photos. And he's actually had people tell him, like when we started dating, he's like, you look different. And I look at old photos of him and I'm like, your smile is different when you're with me. There's like pre-Anita smile and then like post-Anita smiles. And so, maybe it's not just a saying. Maybe the person actually does become more attractive because something in their spirit lights up.
But I also feel like it's also personal. Attraction is personal. So just because someone else doesn't see it doesn't mean that you, the person that's in the relationship, doesn't see it. And I find that, especially with social media and in the world that we're living in, it almost feels like, well, I want everybody to approve of the person that I'm with, as opposed to you actually seeing them. Because I know a lot of women will be like, well, I like him, but my friends say no, or my family says no. What advice would you give to women, young women, old women that are like so stuck on the externals of a man, and they're single and they do want to be loved? What advice would you give them?
I would highlight the value of friendship, because what it does is it gives you time to get to know the person before you start superimposing your requirements and your check boxes on top of them. And it just allows you to have fun, to have conversations that are no pressure. And that's really how you get to know a person. And I can't underscore the value of like the person as opposed to what they look like. And, Tim would always repeat this to me, be like all of us will look different in like 10, 20 years. And you really just have to ignore the whole couple goals thing. Like, unless it's something godly and positive, honestly, so much of it is just empty and it's really not worth our time. And then and I would say, like, this is where we can be so grateful for the faith, right? And so I was brought up in a Christian household. So I had a concept of what it meant to know someone with character, to be someone with character, and to like look for character in people, right? And so we should actually we should maximize the fact that we have this gift, right? We have this extra filter, and so like use it, look for a godly person, not just a good looking person.
Oh, say that again. Say that again.
Look for a godly person, not just a good looking person.
Wow. Anita, you said a mouthful, and to be honest, I think that sums it up. Look for a godly person, not just a good looking person, because beauty fades, as the Bible says. Charm is deceptive, beauty is vain. A woman, a man that fears the Lord is to be praised. And I feel like you found someone after your heart that loves you, that will take care of you, that you will love and take care of. And I think ultimately, when the social media shuts down, when you close your phone and you go to bed at night, it's just you and the person. It's just you and the person. There's no, you shut out the outside noise and you realize that all that matters is love. And I love how you give glory to God for your story. It's very unique. I've never seen this. I've seen a lot more recently, a lot of different, I think they've even got a whole show on it on YouTube about like opposites relationships, but your one just spoke to me on a different level, because it just felt so pure. And I think that God aspect of it, I think this is a message for a lot of people. And I want to thank you for doing this interview. Where can the people find you? And are you going to return to YouTube? Because I know you do have a YouTube channel.
We are planning to return to YouTube eventually. And we've actually created our own channel, which for now just houses some like reels or shorts. But for now, you can find me on Instagram at Anita Wing Lee and Tim at Tim Mutu. He will start writing. I'm glad that you mentioned it, because I'm also bugging him. He doesn't write. It doesn't flow quite as freely as it does for me, but he has a writer in the house to coach him along.
I love that.
And then otherwise, people can join us on our website, anitaandtim.com.
Love doesn't always look the way we expect. Sometimes love comes wrapped in difference, but God's plan for our lives are always higher than our own. This story reminds us that true love isn't just about appearances, but obedience, trust, and walking in the blessing of God's design. So if you've been tempted to overlook someone because they do not look the part, maybe it's time to pause and ask yourself, could this be God's divine gift hidden in a package I never imagined? Because when God writes your love story, it's always more beautiful than we could have written for ourselves.